This is Jay Rogers. I'm the director of the Forerunner, and I wanted to share this recent article. This is called Ukraine's Coming Neo-Nazi Coup and Civil War. A power struggle among Ukraine's ultranationalists looms on the horizon. And wanted to start off by saying that, the Russia-Ukraine war seems to be going full speed, but also seems to be close to a breaking point where things might go very differently than what was happening a year ago. And if we look at the different countries that are kind of lined up on either side, we have, Russia, Belarus, some of the countries in Central Asia, China, Iran, and several other countries in the global south that are on the side of Russia, and then 31 NATO countries and some other minor countries that are backing Ukraine. There's been a huge number of casualties on both sides, and that's caused some of the NATO countries to balk. Slovakia, Hungary, and others are at odds with Zelensky because he wants to continue the war and they don't see any way that he can possibly win. And they just think that there's too many casualties. The troop deaths and injuries in Ukraine are near 500,000, and they think close to 1 million wounded. There have been all kinds of weapons used: ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, jet fighters, bombers, of course, the Russian Navy. But the war seems to be stuck along the front lines. That's on the surface. That's what our media is telling us. But, behind the scenes, there is a breakdown of the Ukrainian troops. The front line is actually fracturing. And there's an inability of the West to continue to support Ukraine with ammunition, supplies, and especially billions of dollars. Biden asked Congress for a $106 billion package, and the Republicans just don't want to pass it. To understand why Ukraine is in the situation it is, it's useful to go back to the 2014 elections, and you see that Petro Poroshenko won an election, but this was after a coup occurred, and there were people in the eastern part of Ukraine that didn't want him as president. They felt the coup was illegal. Also in the south, but most of the people in the west supported him, and the center was divided 50-50. One way of looking at Ukraine might be to understand that the eastern oblasts, Lugansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, and then Crimea are pro-Russian. These other oblasts are sort of mixed 50-50. You have a region in the middle that's historically Russian, but is 50-50 as well. And then you have Ukraine proper, which is south of Kiev toward the west, which is more pro-Ukrainian or Ukrainian nationalists. Then you have two regions that used to be part of Poland and Hungary prior to World War II, which are also fiercely nationalist too. In the meantime, we have the Ukrainian government arresting Orthodox priests because they believe that they're pro-Russian, even though they deny that. And this is a breakdown of the language speakers. You've had Russian language speakers being discriminated against, Russian schools and universities closed, the Russian language prohibited and discouraged, and so on. Even though 80% of the people in the south speak Russian, half the people in the east speak Russian, and only in the very far west does the Ukrainian language dominate absolutely. And the fact of the matter is that the United States staged a coup in Ukraine back in 2013 and 2014. Victoria Nuland admitted in a speech that the U.S. had spent $5 billion to try to peel Ukraine away from Russia and get it into NATO. George Soros himself actually spent $180 million of his own money to do the same thing. And at the same time, Kyiv is on the edge of a coup. This man right here, Valery Zaluzhny, he's the man that said he could beat Russia last year, late 2022, if he just got the resources. If he just had enough tanks, enough armored vehicles, infantry fighting vehicles, and ammunition, they could beat Russia. But unfortunately for the West, this is the man that wants to be the next president. He is a Nazi Banderite, which means that he supports Stepan Bandera, who is the hero of Ukraine, according to their Duma, their parliament. Stepan Bandera was responsible for tens of thousands of deaths during World War II, Jews, Russians, Poles, Gypsies. And this type of thing would make the Ukrainian government very unpopular in places like Poland and Hungary and Germany, especially. There is a Banderite faction in Ukraine. Many of the police and militia, they admire the Nazi collaborators during World War II. And so the question is, what's going to happen when the United States finally throws Zelensky and Ukraine under the bus? Well, it might be a situation where they realize that to be an enemy of America can be dangerous, but to be a friend is fatal. And I want you to think about this. If you think that this is impossible, that Ukraine could actually have its government overthrown and descend into a civil war, think about what's happened in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, places that the United States, was involved with. When we withdraw, the region basically descends into chaos. There's civil wars, all kinds of things going on. There's a couple of different scenarios that could happen. Ukraine might be willing to get rid of its non-loyal citizens, the Russian-oriented part of the citizens. They might go after them. A second scenario might be that Russia itself might sponsor the coup and the civil war. They might go in and try to get rid of the Nazis in the government at all levels, from the police all the way up to the presidential cabinet, as well as the war criminals in the military that, committed crimes against the people in Donbass all throughout the war. So I said in the beginning that, this type of cleansing might actually be a cheaper kind of a war than the current conflict. You don't need as much heavy weaponry and so on, but it's also cheaper as far as lives go. There wouldn't be as many lives killed as in a long, protracted war. So we'll see what happens. Like I said, we've seen this type of thing happen before when the U.S. withdraws from a conflict. And unfortunately for Ukraine, they seem to be like the next victim of the United States, using a country to try to just advance the interests of the United States and not really caring about what happens in the country afterwards. So I would say, pray for Ukraine, pray for Russian-speaking people in Ukraine for about what might happen in the near future.